Okay, these are the Ptolemies spelled with a P in the front, right?
Yeah.
Right. Okay, so this was a long, like pterodactyl, right? Or ptarmigan. So the Ptolemy.
Hi, everybody. Welcome back into Bufnagle, the podcast. I'm Zach. As always, I'm joined by Rafe. Rafe, how we doing?
Zach, I am fantastic. Another Sunday afternoon and another episode of Bufnagle podcasting, and time to chit chat with you. It's a good day. It's a good day.
There we go. Yeah. So it's Sunday. Hopefully this episode's going to get out back on our normal Tuesday release date after some technical issues last week, but we're looking forward to that. And Rafe, you texted me something that I thought was common knowledge earlier this week, but in fact is the opposite of common knowledge.
Yes, I was listening to a podcast I listened to, The Young Heretics. If anybody wants to join on to that, you can search that wherever you find them. But they mentioned that that Alexander the Great was in his youth tutored by the one and only Aristotle. And I said, Zach, did you know that Alexander the Great was taught by Aristotle? And he was like, yeah, everybody knows that, Dad. And I was like, oh.
Well, but I don't think everybody, but I think that goes back to the fact that I have a weird historical education specifically related to the classical civilizations of Egypt, Greek, and the Romans.
The Rome. I do like calling it the Rome. I think we have to start doing that. No, you have a degree in history and you've studied these kinds of things. And I guess that's the lesson.
And I've watched National Treasure like 17 times.
What would we do without Nicolas Cage saving our finances for the future? Okay, so let me lead into this, because we then had some other discussions about this, and I know we had some discussions before, and I think we decided that we were going to make it firmer this time. Okay, so I'm going to go through and then I'm going to give you I'm going to spend most of today on this. All right, I'm going to give you what I perceive as most of anybody who has even a little bit of education on this, what they generally, I think they believe about
the historical timeline of the classical civilizations.
Hey, there you go. And so I'm going to go through that, and I'm sure some people will roll their eyes, but then what I'm going to ask you to do is refute those things or clean them up, polish them, realign them, and that sort of thing. So I'm going to start with this general idea that, okay, so we are, give or take, we're in 2000 AD, all right? And so it's been 2,000 years since the birth of Christ, give or take. And then like recorded history goes back about 2,000 years before that. Now, granted, yeah, there's other things. I got that. There's other things in there. But we're talking a 4,000 year period here between 2000 BC and the present day. And most everything that we think about has happened in that time frame, but most of it has happened in the last 2,500 years, not the last 4,000. So here's the way I'm seeing this thing. All right, we're going to start with the Great Pyramids by the Egyptians. The Egyptians had these big. They built the big pyramids along the Nile.
The Sphinx.
You got a Sphinx thing. You got pharaohs and stuff. A lot of sand. You got Yul Brynner being fair, right? You got all this stuff. You got Cleopatra.
And the mummy shows up eventually. You know,
we got there's a movie too, which we ought to add to the discussion list, is the Mummy movies with Brendan Fraser, right? Those are
wildly entertaining.
Those are,
and like everything else we do, we just completely just degenerated and went off a tangent here. So let's.
Okay, well, back on that. Okay, so we got Egyptians 2,500 years ago. Now, what I'm telling you is kind of right, but Zach's going to point out that a lot of this is wrong. Okay, so Egyptians, pyramids, 2,500 years ago, and then we got Egyptians for a while, and then we get Cleopatra because she's all hot and sexy. Okay, and then we go along, and then after Egypt goes away or something, then Greece flowers, and we get Greece blossoms. There you go. It not only flowers, it blooms. We get a blossom, and we get seeds coming out from Greece. We got Athens, we got Sparta, we got Marathon, we got the guy running and saying "Rejoice, we conquer,"
and then dying.
Well, he died at the end, right? But he delivered his message.
So I'm in the minority belief that if you run the marathon and you don't die at the end, then like you did it wrong. So
that should be one of the things.
Yeah,
you have to say "Rejoice, we conquer" in Greek. and then you have to tip over. All right, you got Homer. All right, you got the Trojan War and all that
The
stuff.
Odyssey that Homer wrote.
Odyssey, Iliad. You
Yep.
got Cyclops. All right, you got John Goodman playing the Cyclops in the movie "Oh Brother, Where Art Thou?" All right, and then the Romans come in. We get the Rome, right? And the other thing, a couple other things out of Greece. We got democracy. We got Socrates. We got Aristotle. We got Plato. Socrates from Bill and
Ted.
Right, and then we get to Rome. Okay, and Rome had the Roman Empire, and then that became Julius Caesar, and then the Republic.
Roman Republic, and then Roman Empire.
Caesar, and then the Empire, and then Caesar Augustus, and then we had the birth of Christ, and then eventually Nero fiddled while Rome burned, and then U.S. of A. Right, that's how people see this whole thing. Charlemagne might be thrown in there, maybe a little Norman conquest of England, and all right, but that's how we see it now. Looking back on that, that's a huge rambling thing, and every one of those things could be a week of podcasts. But what we want to talk about is the fact that timeline that I stretched from 2500 BC to the present day is really pretty restricted, isn't it? It doesn't really start way back then.
Yeah, other than the Egyptians, because the pyramids were built 2584 BC is the closest estimate we got.
Wait, we got it within a year?
We have it like 8. We don't have the month, but a very, very long time ago, the Egyptians built the pyramids. The Egyptian civilization existed since that moment in time is the best way to think about it.
No, there were like dynasties and stuff, right? And they had
the Egyptians were very similar to the way that we think of if you study the Chinese and Japanese ancient civilizations, and it was very dynastic. Is that the right? Dynastic, yeah. And what the Roman Empire eventually became, and the fact that you had the king or the pharaoh or the emperor, and then they had a kid or 2 kids, and then they would try to kill each other to take over the throne. Very similar in that way was the way the early Egyptian civilization existed.
And that was pretty long, though, and it just kind of went on and on.
So,
and on. It was like the Chinese did.
Along with, so that was like from the pyramids until you could say 500 BC. And then around 500 BC is when we had the birth of both Rome and the Greek Empire.
Okay, so that's where I kind of lit up when you said that. So we're talking like 2500 to 500 BC. That's a period of 2,000 years of an Egyptian civilization that's just kind of cranking out cranking out pharaohs and kings and stuff, cranking out dynasties. You got a little King Tut in there somewhere, and you got some ancient, right? But Cleopatra is not in that group, right?
No, we will. Okay, the famous Cleopatra is not in that group.
So there's another one.
There are 7.
At least
she's Cleopatra 7, the famous one, the charismatic, sexy, hanging out with the Romans in Rome, Cleopatra. The one we think of when we see a Cleopatra. She was hanging out with Caesar and Brutus and plotting some murders and doing all that fun stuff.
Okay, so does Cleopatra, does that mean something? Does it mean like the lady who's in charge, or does that mean was that just her name, or do we not know, or do you not know? I mean, it doesn't really matter, but I'm just thinking.
I never thought of that. What her name means.
Well, there you go. There's another topic there. So we got 2,500 years over, or 2,000 years over that period of time. There's about 6 Cleopatras interspersed in there somewhere, and then around 500 BC, you say things start to flower with Greece and with Rome. Is there a date that people typically start that in Greece, like Athens or Sparta? Or
you could look at that. I like looking at when the 7 ancient wonders and when they were built.
Okay,
because those were kind of like monuments to the gods, monuments to like civil advances in civilization. The first,
so these 7 wonders are what?
So we have the Great Pyramid in Giza. We have the Hanging Gardens of Babylon, which have never been found. The Temple of Artemis, a statue of Zeus, the mausoleum at Halicarchus, the Colossus of Rhodes, and then the Lighthouse of Alexandria.
And have we found remnants of most of these, or
We
all of
have
these?
found remnants of all of them except for the Hanging Gardens of Babylon because of the way we know it is located on those two famous rivers in Persia area,
Tigris and the Euphrates.
Tigris and Euphrates, but because of the way that water and gravity works, those rivers have diverged so much over time that we can't pinpoint where it is, and that area has gone through so much change geographically and climatically.
Climatistically.
Yeah, climatalistically. There we go. Look at that English. That it's hard to pinpoint exactly where that location is.
Oh, okay. So now these 7, were these named by somebody like somebody like Petrarch or somebody came out and said, "Hey, here these are the wonders of the world," or it's just kind of just standard knowledge?
The 7 ancient wonders. I say now they're kind of standard knowledge. I think most people know pyramids of Giza, Hanging Gardens of Babylon, and then Lighthouse at Alexandria. I would be hard pressed for people off the top of their head to name the Mausoleum or the Colossus of Rhodes, especially because the Colossus of Rhodes, because of where it was located, it was weathered a lot by storms and wind, and it pretty much collapsed 70 years later.
Oh, okay. So, all right. Well, so be it. Yankee Stadium is still standing. All right. So, all right. So Greece kind of comes up with as a group of city-states, and they kind of battle each other, and democracy kind of erupts out of Athens and Sparta, and Homer writes Homer
writes some stuff.
He writes about wars and Troy and things, and then the Rome comes into being, and that's the what is that? Remus and Romulus, the wolves get together, but Rome gets founded. But before, is it? So you said they kind of grew up together. So like if I'm looking at Socrates, Aristotle, and Plato, I want to put that side by side with what's happening in Rome. And this is what we started with Alexander the Great. So Alexander was a Greek guy, right?
Yeah. So Alexander the Great was 330 BC. That's not exact, but it's a good.
I got you.
330 BC. He was tutored by Aristotle. He went on 4 very big campaigns out to the east to now kind of present day India, and he went down and he expanded the Greek Empire to Egypt, which I can get back to later with Cleopatra. So
Greece took over Egypt.
At one point in time, Alexander the Great, while also being the king of Macedonia, was also the pharaoh of Egypt.
So I can conclude from that Alexander the Great looked like Yul Brynner.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Okay, so he was a pharaoh at one point.
And then when Alexander the Great went to Egypt, kind of absorbed the Egyptian civilization that was thriving there. He installed his own government there, and that's where the famous line that existed from that was the Ptolemy line, and from the Ptolemy line we get Cleopatra.
Okay, these are the Ptolemies spelled with a P in the front, right?
Yeah.
Right. Okay, so this was a line like pterodactyl, right, or ptarmigan. So the Ptolemies were sorry, Zach takes a drink as I talk about the Ptolemies. So the Ptolemies were Greeks that emigrated to Egypt, or there was an Egyptian family that spawned.
They were a Greek family that immigrated to Egypt, and then were kind of the controlling pharaohs of Egypt. So the Ptolemies were pharaohs.
Ptolemies were pharaohs in Egypt, although they were Greek.
That were Greek, yes.
Wow. All right. Well, see, there's a thing. Okay. And you wonder, like, why did I listen to the first 14 minutes of this podcast? That's exactly why right there. That stuff you don't get other places. Well, you get it, but you don't get it with the Ptolemies. All right. So now we have Aristotle. So Aristotle was teaching Alexander the Great. So this was around in the early, I guess the late part of the 4th century BC, which is like 330, 320 time frame. Yeah. Aristotle was there, and he was preceded by Socrates.
Yep.
Then followed by Plato.
Yep.
All right.
And from Plato, we get Plato's Republic, which is influential to political rulings and philosophy as a whole as well.
And now Cicero was a guy back then.
Yep.
Was he a Greek guy?
I don't know enough about Cicero to.
I don't know, but yeah, because I just know he was important to the founders. So that's why I was just curious if he was. Okay, so we have Rome, and then Rome kind of develops.
Yeah, so Rome during all this time, Rome was founded in about 700 BC, but the Roman Republic that we think of today that influenced democracies and governments throughout history didn't really exist until 500 BC. And then the famous stuff that the Roman Republic didn't happen until like 200 BC when Hannibal and his elephants invaded Italy, and Italy at the time was the Roman Republic. So that's all happening while Alexander's offspring not Alexander didn't have any offspring, while Alexander and the Greeks were taking over Egypt and kind of the eastern part of Europe, and then the Roman Republic was expanding west to France and the British Isles.
Okay, so I'm putting this all together. So Rome started 700 or so, and what were they then? Just a collection of small city-states?
Yeah, it was the standard city-state, the same thing that you saw in Greek, the Greeks with Athens and kind of then state standoffishness.
So did they have I know in England, they in 1296 there was this Magna Carta thing, and you can point to that as a thing that really established rights amongst that there were rights amongst people.
Yeah,
that nobility had to respect, right? Right. So is there a thing in Rome that says, okay, so they were kind of goofballs for a while, and then around 500 BC, it was the signing of the whatever, or the formation of the Senate, is there a thing?
It's probably the formation of the Roman Senate. I don't have an exact date for that. It was a time before Hannibal invaded Italy, so it was sometime between 500 BC and 200 BC.
Okay. All right. So they do that.
I'm accurate. I'm just really not precise.
And so they have a republic at this time. And the goal of the republic is that the public is the public thing.
Yeah.
Right? And the public thing is the law. And the great thing about the republic then is that the law is constant regardless of who is there to administrate it. Right. And that's the whole idea as opposed to being some sort of empire or tyrannical rule that who's ever in charge makes the rules. The republic is like, these are the rules and these are in place, and your job as government person is to make sure these are carried out. And that's how a republic works. But that faded, that fell away.
So and this gets us back to Cleopatra. So Cleopatra was hanging around in Egypt doing Cleopatra things in around 50 BC.
Okay, so she was doing, just a little tiny side note, Cleopatra things in Egypt in 50 BC would be like hanging out, going to parties.
Taking a boat from Alexandria in Egypt and heading over to, I don't know, like someplace like called Rome and hanging out with this guy named Caesar.
Because he was a bigwig, and she was, let's put it this way. Correct me if I'm wrong, she was like hot. I mean, she was like...
No, she wasn't. This is also another common misconception. She was attractive, but she wasn't like what's her name? Like
she's Marianne or Ginger.
I haven't seen that show in a long time.
Marianne was from Kansas, and she made a good pie, and Ginger wore slinky dresses.
Oh, she was Marianne. But the thing about Cleopatra, the reason people have created this idea that she was like super hot and like everyone was into her is because she was extremely charismatic, and she could work with people, and she was a good negotiator, and she was all those other things that we expect from Egyptians who are actually Greeks. So Cleopatra hanging out in Egypt, doing Egypt things. Caesar hanging out in Rome, doing Caesar things. And then at the same time.
Yeah. Okay. So right. So then he's a general, right? Or before he got to be Caesar, he was just a guy.
Yeah.
Right. And then he went somewhere to go to war, and then he said, "I'm coming back in. I'm going to take over." And the Senate said, "If you go across the river, that's active war." He said, "Enough of that," and he
crossed the Rubicon. So, quick little side note of this. So, while Rome was fighting Carthage in the Punic Wars, which was around the same time period, Egypt was flourishing under the Ptolemy Empire, the Ptolemy rule. And then Egypt was pretty much independent of the Greek Empire at the time. And they existed until Cleopatra passed away after all this time, around 30 BC.
Around 30, Cleopatra made it to 30 BC.
Yep, and that's about when the Egyptians as a strong, powerful civilization ended.
That's when they finally fell.
They kind of faded.
Okay, but meanwhile,
the Greeks are doing Greek things, and they're expanding east to Persia. And the Romans, led by Caesar, are crossing the Rubicon, and Caesar's like, nah, I'm in charge now. I am the Senate.
He didn't become Caesar until he crossed. Was he just Julius? Was he like, hi, I make orange juice? He ran before he was a senator, he ran Orange Julius. Is that accurate?
That is false, but I think we should find a way to make it true.
Okay, so he just did that stuff, and then he went away, and he came back, and then the Senate kind of said, okay, you're Caesar, you're a god, you're in charge, you got the military now, you're everything, and he hung out there a while. And how long was he in charge before Brutus etude him?
Okay, so Caesar became the dictator of Rome around 45 BC, and then he was assassinated around 44 BC.
How was your 1 year?
And then what happened between 44 BC and 27 BC was what my favorite thing in the world, chaos. And then the Roman Republic, as we think of it, fell. And what happened was the Roman Empire began. And then the Roman Empire existed from 27 BC until about 500 AD.
Right, and 27 BC. At this point, you can start bringing the Christianity stuff in there if you study that thing. Now, so for what it's worth, on that side, for those of you who did Old Testament stuff, Abraham was hanging around about 2000 BC. King David was 1000 BC. Isaiah wrote the Isaiah stuff in 700 BC, give or take. Right, these are all approximate dates, right?
Yep.
Right, and then It's to me that's really interesting, because I always think we think of like David and Abraham to be like so far back. It's like before the sun even came up during it's like prior to the dawn of civilization, but yet they were doing all this stuff that long ago. And then this little Rome and this Greek and Rome thing was really pretty short, right before the birth of Christ. So Jesus gets up there. You got Pontius Pilate, who gets stuck being the Roman guy in hanging out in Jerusalem. You get King Herod, who's a puppet king. Jesus comes along and changes the world by making Rome into a Christian state.
Not exactly, but the seeds existed there. The Roman Empire, from about the assassination of Julius Caesar until 300 AD, was not a Christian empire. It was a Christian empire for its last 200 years, thanks to Constantine. He had kind of made Christianity the official religion of Rome, and everyone adopted it. But during the whole time of the Roman Empire, they were expanding and conquering things, specifically west into Europe, as they go up and into what is now the British Isles, and they build Hadrian's Wall and say, you're barbarians, you stay over there. We're Rome's, and we do Rome things.
And then Constantine kind of turned it Christian, but eventually. So where does Nero sit in this thing? We fiddle with Rome burns, but the Visigoths, was he in charge?
So Nero was 400. No. Well, I think there were multiple Neros, I think, is also the issue here.
Okay. Well. Okay, so let me.
Which one do you think? You're thinking, because the Visigoths come around 500 BC and they sack Rome. Rome falls to the ground. The Roman Empire collapses and crumbles, and then where the Roman Empire expanded to places like Germany and France, in Germany you get the Holy Roman Empire, which was neither holy nor Roman nor an empire. But it was just a collection of German city-states that gave themselves a name, and then
other than that, the name fits perfectly.
Yeah, and then in England, you get things like Charlemagne, and then
But Charlemagne was in. He was
eventually that leads to the fact that there's these power vacuums where the Normans come in, Charlemagne comes up to power, and this is all happens over the next 1,000 years, and we get the Dark Ages.
We get the Dark Ages and the Renaissance, but that's a discussion for another day. We've had that one set up. So wow, okay, so this is great. Let me see if I can summarize real quick because we got about 2 minutes here, and I want to make sure we stay under time. Things were pretty condensed. The Egyptians went for a long time, but the thing we think about most of the time with like Cleopatra and stuff, she was a Greek. She just happened to be kind of, she was a great
attached to Egypt.
She got attached to Egypt, and then these guys were all running around together doing stuff that, as far as the time frame goes, that 400 years from 400 BC to the birth of Christ, that was loaded with activity.
Or even you can look at from when Hannibal invaded Italy to 200 or 300 BC when Constantine made the Roman Empire a Christian nation. Christian empire.
Wait, you said BC. Okay, so get the time to between till 300 AD.
That one, yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
There was this 500 to 400 year time frame of stuff happening.
A lot of stuff happened. All right. Well, Zach, this is fantastic. I'm really glad we went through this. This is anybody who has had concerns or questions about that. Hopefully they've been answered, and you have been told some things that are false, which is great. Like Socrates was in Bill and Ted. No, that actually was true. He was in there. So that's what we got for today. I'm going to say thank you for listening. We really appreciate your patronage. Please tell your friends to listen as well. You can send it.
Tell your friends to listen as well.
Yeah, and tell them for every friend that gets referred, they get a free podcast. So that will keep the free podcast coming. We'll always take sponsors. Let us know if you have something you want to pawn off on us. We'll do that. Email bufnagle@bufnagle.com. You can reach Zach in case he was lying about something legally. That's legal@bufnagle.com. We are on the web on Twitter @bufnagle, and that's about it. Zach, anything else?
I think that's about it. There, we got some. We got the division. No, not divisional games. We got the
division.
The league championship series. There you go. Nailed it. In baseball,
those are taking place this week. We got Atlanta, LA, and the Rays in Houston. So Harry's hope of having LA beat Houston in the World Series still could come to pass. We're hoping for the Rays to win something. Maybe the Rays in Atlanta.
That's what I think that'd be fun.
Yeah, that'd be one that would be least interesting to other people. So
yeah,
we're going to call it quits here. Zach, we'll see you again this week sometime.
I hope so.
We'll be in touch. Thanks, everybody.
Yep. Bye, guys.
All right. Bye-bye.